Victoria Bennett's Louboutin heels clicked purposefully against the polished marble floor of Elite Motors, each step echoing through the pristine showroom like a metronome counting down to destiny. The afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the subtle highlights in her naturally coiled hair, creating a halo effect that seemed to announce her presence with quiet dignity. She hadn't come to make a statement, at least not intentionally. Her visit to the prestigious dealership was purely practical. The Aston Martin DB11 had caught her eye weeks ago, and today was simply about making it hers. The showroom was a testament to automotive excellence, with vehicles arranged like precious jewels in a crown. Each car's metallic finish gleamed under strategic lighting, creating an atmosphere that whispered of exclusivity and privilege. Victoria moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to such spaces, though she noticed, as she always did, the subtle shift in energy that accompanied her entrance. A young couple nearby paused their conversation with a sales representative, their eyes following her movement across the floor. Victoria had long ago mastered the art of ignoring such attention, having built her empire in rooms where she was often the only black woman present. Today, she wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit that spoke of understated wealth, chosen with the same careful consideration she applied to every aspect of her life. The Aston Martin that had drawn her here sat in a position of honor, its midnight blue finish so deep it seemed to contain entire universes. Victoria approached it with genuine appreciation, noting the subtle curves and aggressive stance that made the DB11 a marvel of modern engineering. Her fingers, adorned with a single platinum ring, her mother's last gift to her, hovered just above the pristine paint. Blake Thompson, the dealership's owner, had been watching from his glass-walled office. He emerged now, adjusting his Italian silk tie with manicured fingers that had never known real work. His assessment of Victoria was instantaneous and damning, a calculation based on prejudices so ingrained he wasn't even conscious of them anymore. To him, she was an interruption in his carefully curated world, rather than the potential client she actually was. "Can I help you?" The words fell from his lips like ice cubes into a glass, sharp and cold. His steel-gray eyes barely acknowledged her presence as he directed his attention to a wealthy-looking couple who had just entered, the kind of clients he believed belonged in his establishment. Victoria turned to face him, her expression perfectly composed. Years of boardroom battles had taught her to recognize this dance, to anticipate the steps before they were taken. "Yes, actually, I'm interested in the DB11. I'd like to know more about its specifications, particularly the performance upgrades available for the V12 engine." Blake's laugh was subtle but cutting, a short, dismissive sound that spoke volumes. "The DB11 starts at $300,000, he said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "Perhaps I could direct you to our pre-owned section? We have some very nice, more affordable options." The air in the showroom seemed to thicken. A nearby sales associate shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the situation unfolding but lacking the courage to intervene. Victoria remained still, her posture unchanged, though something flickered in her dark eyes, not anger, but a quiet determination that had served her well throughout her life. "I'm quite familiar with the pricing," she replied, her voice carrying the same authority that had guided her through countless high-stakes negotiations. "I'm particularly interested in this specific model. Would you prefer I speak with another representative about the purchase?" Blake's expression tightened, the muscles in his jaw working beneath his perfectly clean-shaven FA. The suggestion that he might lose a commission to one of his employees, however unlikely he thought the sale might be, pricked at his pride. Still, he couldn't quite shed his presumptions, couldn't see past the lens of his own prejudice to recognize the power that stood before him. "Ma'am," he said, the word dripping with condescension, "this is a prestigious establishment. We cater to a particular clientele. I'm sure you understand." He gestured vaguely toward the exit, as if showing her the way out would somehow make his meaning clearer. Victoria's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. "I understand perfectly what kind of establishment this is, Mr. Thompson." She reached into her Hermes bag, another detail Blake had overlooked in his rush to judgment. and withdrew her business card. Perhaps you'd like to discuss the purchase over coffee? I find these conversations go better when everyone is comfortable with their assumptions. Blake didn't take the card. Instead, his face hardened, embarrassment transforming rapidly into anger. The situation was slipping from his control, and like many men accustomed to authority, he responded to this loss of power with aggression. He reached for his phone, his intention clear in the set of his shoulders and the thin line of his lips. Victoria recognized the moment for what it was, not just an individual's prejudice, but a systemic pattern she had encountered throughout her life. She had built her success by navigating these waters, by turning such moments into opportunities for change. As Blake began to dial, she remained perfectly still, already thinking several moves ahead, just as she had done throughout her career. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, catching the car's pristine finishes and creating halos of light that seemed to illuminate the scene like a stage. In the background, the quiet murmur of other customers had fallen silent, all eyes drawn to the drama unfolding in their midst. The air conditioning hummed softly, a counterpoint to the tension that now filled the space. Victoria thought of her son, Marcus, and the world she had worked so hard to build for him. She thought of all the times she had chosen her battles carefully, knowing when to fight and when to build strength for future confrontations. As Blake's fingers punched in the final digits, she knew this would be one of those moments that defined not just her day, but the narrative of change she had always worked to create. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the showroom, marking the beginning of what would become a pivotal moment in both their lives. Victoria stood her ground, her dignity intact, ready to face whatever came next with the same grace and determination that had carried her to the top of her field. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the polished floors of Elite Motors, though none of them yet knew just how far those ripples would reach. Victoria's eyes never left Blake as he barked into his phone, his words carrying across the now silent showroom. "Yes, I need security and police assistance. We have an unwanted visitor refusing to leave." His emphasis on unwanted cut through the air like a blade. But Victoria remained unmoved, her posture a testament to years of facing down similar challenges in corporate boardrooms and beyond. The security guard appeared first, a hulking figure in a dark uniform who seemed uncertain about the situation he was entering. His eyes darted between Blake's rigid stance and Victoria's composed demeanor, clearly sensing the disconnect between Blake's urgent call and the reality before him. But like many before him, he chose the path of least resistance, aligning himself with the authority he recognized. "Ma'am, I'll need you to exit the premises," the guard stated, his voice carrying a hint of apologetic uncertainty. Victoria turned to face him fully, her movement deliberate and dignified. "I'm a potential customer interested in purchasing a vehicle," she stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the showroom. "Mr. Thompson has decided, without any provocation, that I don't belong here. I'd like everyone present to be very clear about what's happening right now." The first police cruiser arrived with surprising speed, its lights reflecting off the pristine vehicles in silent warning. Two officers entered the showroom, their hands resting casually on their belts as they assessed the situation. Blake immediately approached them, his words tumbling out in a practiced narrative of disruption and threat that bore no resemblance to reality. Victoria's mind flashed back to a similar moment 20 years ago, when she'd stood in a high-end department store, her young son Marcus clutching her hand as security questioned her about the designer purse she'd just purchased. She'd handled that situation with grace too, turning it into a teaching moment for Marcus about dignity in the face of prejudice. Now, as the officers approached her, she drew on that same well of strength. "Officers," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I'd be happy to show you my identification and explain the situation." But Blake cut her off, his voice rising with the false confidence of someone who had never had his authority truly questioned. "She's been aggressive and disruptive," he claimed, the lie falling easily from his lips. "She's frightening our legitimate customers." The couple who had been watching the scene unfold exchanged uncomfortable glances, the woman's hand rising to her throat in a nervous gesture. The younger of the two officers reached for his handcuffs, the metal catching the showroom's bright lights. "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back." The words fell like lead into pristine space, each syllable echoing off the polished surfaces. Victoria's mind raced through her options, calculating consequences and possibilities with the same sharp precision that had made her a formidable CEO. She could see the headlines already. Black woman arrested at luxury car dealership. But perhaps that was exactly what needed to happen. Sometimes, she knew, the most powerful statements were made not through resistance, but through dignified submission that exposed the absurdity of the situation. As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Victoria lifted her chin slightly, her eyes meeting Blake's with an unwavering gaze. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed showroom, "I want you to remember this moment. Remember my face, and remember your choices today. They're going to matter more than you can imagine." The click of the handcuffs seemed to echo through the space, a sound that would haunt Blake Thompson's dreams in the weeks to come, though he didn't know it yet. Victoria's heels continued to click against the marble floor as she was let out, each step measured and deliberate. Other customers pressed themselves against the walls, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and in some cases, dawning recognition of the injustice they were witnessing. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dealership's lot. Victoria stood tall as the officers led her to their cruiser, her mind already several steps ahead. She thought of Marcus, now a brilliant civil rights attorney, and allowed herself a small smile. Blake Thompson had no idea what he had just set in motion. In the back of the police cruiser, Victoria relaxed slightly, letting her shoulders drop for the first time since entering the dealership. The partition between her and the officers provided a moment of privacy, and she used it to center herself. 20 years of building the Bennett Financial Group had taught her patience, strategy, and the power of turning obstacles into opportunities. Through the window, she could see Blake Thompson standing in the dealership's doorway, his face a mix of triumph and lingering uncertainty. He straightened his tie again, a nervous gesture that betrayed his discomfort with the situation he had created. Victoria watched him, noting every detail, every gesture. In her mind, she was already composing the series of events that would unfold from this moment. The police cruiser pulled away from Elite Motors, its engine a quiet hum beneath her. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, remembering the day she'd started her company with nothing but determination and a laptop in her small apartment. She'd built an empire while raising Marcus alone, teaching him about resilience, justice, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Today's events would become another lesson, another chapter in their ongoing story of perseverance and triumph. As they drove through the city streets, Victoria's mind turned to Marcus. He would be in his office now, probably reviewing case files or preparing for his next court appearance. The thought of his reaction when he heard about this incident brought another small smile to her lips. Blake Thompson had just made a mistake that would ripple through his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The handcuffs bit into her wrists with every small movement, a physical reminder of the indignity she'd just experienced. But Victoria had learned long ago that true dignity couldn't be taken away by external forces. She sat straighter in the back seat, her mind already plotting the coordinates of justice that would transform this moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change. The city passed by outside the window, a blur of buildings and people going about their daily lives, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded at Elite Motors. But soon Victoria knew this story would spread. It would become more than just another incident of discrimination. It would become a moment of reckoning, a challenge to the subtle and not-so-subtle prejudices that still plagued spaces of privilege. As the cruiser stopped at a red light, Victoria caught her reflection in the window. Her makeup was still perfect, her expression composed. She looked every bit the successful businesswoman she was, despite the handcuffs securing her wrists. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her, being arrested while trying to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a luxury car. But she had learned long ago that money alone couldn't buy respect or eliminate prejudice. That required a different kind of currency, one of courage, persistence, and strategic action. The officers in the front seat spoke quietly to each other, their words indistinct but their tone uncertain. They had probably realized by now that something about this arrest didn't feel right, but they were caught in the machinery of procedure, following through with action set in motion by Blake Thompson's false allegations. Victoria's thoughts turned to the other customers who had witnessed her arrest. Their faces had registered shock, discomfort, and in some cases, shame. Those witnesses would be important later, she knew. Their testimonies would help paint the picture of what had really happened in that showroom. In her mind, she began composing a list of the legal and public relations strategies that would soon be set in motion. The cruiser turned onto the street leading to the police station, its shadows lengthening in the late afternoon sun. Victoria straightened her shoulders again, preparing herself for the processing that would follow. She knew this wouldn't be a pleasant experience, but she had weathered worse storms and emerged stronger. This time would be no different. As they pulled into the station's parking lot, Victoria allowed herself one more small smile. Blake Thompson thought he had won this round, had successfully removed an unwanted presence from his precious showroom. But he had no idea that he had just set the stage for his own undoing. The real story was just beginning, and Victoria Benny. TT had learned long ago how to turn moments of injustice into opportunities for transformation. The cruiser came to a stop, and Victoria could hear the officers unbuckling their seatbelts. She took a deep breath, centering herself for what was to come. She thought of Marcus again, imagining the fierce determination that would fill his eyes when he heard about this incident. Blake Thompson was about to learn a valuable lesson about judging books by their covers, and Victoria would make sure it was a lesson he, and others like him, would never forget. Marcus Bennett Jr. sat in his corner office at Bennett & Associates, reviewing depositions for an upcoming civil rights case when his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the degrees and accolades that lined his walls, testament to a career built on fighting injustice. As his eyes scanned the text message describing his mother's arrest, the leather of his executive chair creaked under his suddenly tense grip. For a moment, he sat perfectly still, his father's old pocket watch ticking steadily on his desk, marking the seconds as the information sank in. The image of his mother in handcuffs, his mother, Victoria Bennett, CEO of a billion-dollar financial group, sent a familiar surge of controlled anger through his veins. It was an anger he'd learned to harness, to transform into purposeful action, just as she had taught him. His mind flashed back to their Sunday dinners, where Victoria had always emphasized the importance of strategic thinking over reactive emotion. In a world that's quick to dismiss us, she would say, cutting into her perfectly cooked salmon, we must be quicker to prove them wrong, but always with grace, always with purpose. Standing now, Marcus moved to the window, his reflection overlaying the city skyline. At 35, he carried himself with the same quiet dignity his mother had instilled in him, his tailored suit and composed demeanor masking the warrior spirit beneath. He'd fought and won cases against corporate giants, dismantled discriminatory practices in major institutions. But this was personal. Sarah, he called to his assistant through the intercom, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. And give me everything you can find on Elite Motors and Blake Thompson. I mean, everything. While waiting for the information, Marcus began his own research. His fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up public records, business registrations, and social media profiles. Blake Thompson's face appeared on his screen, smug, self-assured, the kind of man who had never had his authority questioned. Marcus studied the image, noting the expensive watch, the carefully cultivated appearance of success. The preliminary reports from Sarah began flooding his inbox. Elite Motors had a history of customer complaints, many of them quietly settled out of court. Several involved allegations of discriminatory treatment, but none had gone to trial. Thompson had managed to keep things quiet, using money and influence to maintain his dealership's prestigious reputation. Marcus opened his briefcase, the same one his mother had given him when he made partner at his first law firm. Every battle requires the right tools, she'd said then, running her hand over the leather. Now, he began filling it with carefully selected documents, each one a weapon in the arsenal he was assembling. His phone buzzed again, this time with news that his mother had been released from the police station. No charges had been filed, but the damage was done. The humiliation had been inflicted. Marcus's jaw tightened as he imagined his mother maintaining her dignity through the entire ordeal, just as she had done countless times before. Years of practicing law had taught Marcus the importance of timing. He could have rushed to the police station, could have stormed into Elite Motors demanding immediate satisfaction. But that wasn't the way his mother had taught him to handle such situations. Power, she'd often said, lies in making them wait for the blow they know is coming. He spent the next hour meticulously building his case. The security cameras at Elite Motors would have captured everything. The witnesses, other customers present during the incident, would be easy enough to find. But Marcus was after something bigger than just a simple discrimination lawsuit. He intended to use this incident to force a broader conversation about the persistent prejudices that lurked beneath the polished surface of high-end retail spaces. As the office emptied for the day, Marcus remained at his desk, surrounded by the growing evidence of Blake Thompson's past indiscretions. Every document told a story of subtle discrimination, of assumptions made and privileges assumed. Thompson had built his business on catering to a certain clientele, but he had never faced serious consequences for his exclusionary practices. Marcus thought about the first time he'd witnessed discrimination against his mother. He'd been 7, standing in a department store as a security guard questioned her about a purchase. Even then, she'd handled it with grace, using the moment to teach him about dignity in the face of prejudice. "Remember," she'd said afterward, "how they treat you says more about them than it does about you." Now, 28 years later, Marcus was about to teach Blake Thompson that same lesson. He gathered the last of his documents, each one carefully selected to build an irrefutable case. The setting sun cast an orange glow across his desk, reminding him of all the late nights he'd spent preparing for major cases. But this one was different. This one wasn't just about justice. It was about family. Before leaving his office, Marcus paused at the photo of him and his mother at his law school graduation. Victoria stood beside him, beaming with pride, her hand resting on his shoulder. That touch had always carried both support and expectation, a reminder that with their success came responsibility. Looking at the photo now, Marcus made a silent promise. This time, the lesson would stick. The drive to Elite Motors would take 20 minutes. Marcus used the time to mentally prepare, reviewing the strategy he'd developed. He wasn't just Victoria Bennett's son anymore. He was her attorney, and he intended to make Blake Thompson understand exactly what that meant. Traffic moved steadily through the city's streets, each mile bringing him closer to the confrontation that would reshape more than just one man's prejudices. Marcus watched the buildings pass, thinking about how his mother had built her empire in a world that often refused to see her worth. Today, he would make sure she was not only seen but recognized for exactly who she was. The Elite Motors building came into view, its glass and steel structure gleaming in the late afternoon light. Marcus pulled into the parking lot, noting the expensive cars on display. Each one represented the kind of success his mother had achieved, the very success Blake Thompson had refused to acknowledge. Adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror, Marcus gathered his briefcase and stepped out of his car. The same marble floor that had echoed with his mother's footsteps hours earlier now awaited his own. But where she had entered seeking to make a purchase, he was arriving to deliver a lesson in justice that would reshape not just Elite Motors, but the entire conversation about discrimination in spaces of privilege. The glass doors of Elite Motors parted silently before Marcus, the climate-controlled air washing over him as he stepped into the showroom. The same pristine vehicles that had witnessed his mother's humiliation now stood as silent observers to what would follow. Blake Thompson was speaking with a couple near the Porsche display, his back turned to the entrance, unaware that his world was about to shift on its axis. Marcus took in the scene with a lawyer's practiced eye, noting the security camera's positions, the handful of customers browsing the luxury vehicles, and the sales staff who had begun to notice his presence. His mother's arrest had occurred just hours ago, right where he now stood, and he could almost feel the lingering tension in the air. A young sales associate approached him, her smile professional but uncertain. Perhaps something in his demeanor, the purposeful stride, the briefcase, the expertly tailored suit, suggested he wasn't a typical customer. "Welcome to Elite Motors. How can I assist you today?" Marcus's voice carried just enough to draw attention without seeming intentional. "I'm here to see Blake Thompson." He didn't phrase it as a question or a request. Years of courtroom experience had taught him the power of assumed authority. Blake turned at the sound of his name, excusing himself from his customers. His face showed no recognition as he approached Marcus. Why would it? He had no idea that the man standing before him was connected to the woman he'd had arrested mere hours ago. His smile was practiced, professional, yet tinged with the same subtle assessment he'd applied to Victoria. "I'm Blake Thompson. What can I do for you?" He extended his hand, a gesture Marcus deliberately ignored. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus began, his voice carrying the same quiet authority his mother had cultivated over years of corporate leadership. "My name is Marcus Bennett, Jr. I believe you met my mother earlier today." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching as recognition dawned in Blake's eyes. "Victoria Bennett? The woman you had arrested for attempting to purchase an Aston Martin?" The color drained from Blake's face so quickly it was almost comical. His hand, still partially extended, dropped to his side as the implications of Marcus's presence began to register. Around them, the showroom had grown quiet, as if the very air was holding its breath. There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Blake managed, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. "If we could discuss this in my office." "No, Mr. Thompson," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "I think right here is perfect. After all, you didn't offer my mother the privacy of your office when you decided to have her arrested in front of your customers." He opened his briefcase, removing a thick folder with deliberate precision. "Let's talk about that misunderstanding, shall we?" The nearby customers had stopped pretending to look at cars, their attention fully captured by the scene unfolding before them. A few had their phones out, perhaps recognizing the potential viral moment in the making. Marcus didn't mind. In fact, he had counted on it. "First," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the same measured tone he used in court, "let's establish some facts. My mother, Victoria Bennett, CEO of Bennett Financial Group, came here today to purchase a vehicle worth approximately $300,000. Instead of being treated like a valued customer, she was subjected to discrimination, harassment, and false arrest." Blake's tie suddenly seemed too tight around his neck. He tugged at it unconsciously, his eyes darting between Marcus and the growing audience. "Now, Mr. Bennett, if you'll just—" "I'm not finished." Marcus's interruption was razor-sharp. In the past 3 years, Elite Motors has faced 7 complaints of discriminatory treatment. All were quietly settled out of court. He pulled out several documents, letting Blake see the official letterheads. "But this time, Mr. Thompson, quiet isn't an option." A bead of sweat had formed on Blake's temple, catching the showroom's careful lighting. The same lighting that was designed to make his vehicles gleam now seemed to spotlight his discomfort, his unraveling composure. "My mother," Marcus continued, each word precisely chosen, "manages a portfolio worth billions. She sits on the boards of multiple Fortune 500 companies. But more importantly, she's a human being who deserved basic respect. Respect you denied her based on nothing but your own prejudices." Blake's professional mask had completely crumbled now. "If I had known who she was, that's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Marcus's voice carried a sharp edge now. "The fact that you believe respect should be based on status rather than basic human dignity. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, how many other potential customers have you prejudged? How many sales have you lost because you couldn't see past your own biases?" The showroom was completely silent now, every person present caught in the gravity of the moment. Even the gentle hum of the air conditioning seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, pulling out another document. "This is a formal notice of legal action against Elite Motors and you personally. The charges include discrimination, false imprisonment, and defamation. But that's just the beginning." Blake's face had taken on an ashen quality. "Surely we can come to some arrangement?" "An arrangement?" Marcus's laugh was cold, reminiscent of the dismissive sound Blake had directed at Victoria hours earlier. Like the arrangements you made with your previous victims? No, Mr. Thompson. This isn't going away with a quiet settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping just enough that Blake had to lean in slightly to hear him. My mother built her empire by breaking down barriers and spaces very much like this one. She taught me that sometimes justice requires more than just winning a case. It requires changing the conversation. He pulled out his business card, the same gesture his mother had attempted earlier. And this time, Blake's trembling fingers accepted it. My office will be in touch with the formal documentation. I suggest you contact your attorneys immediately. And Mr. Thompson? Marcus paused, making sure he had Blake's full attention. The next time someone walks into your dealership, I recommend you remember this moment before making assumptions about who they are or what they can afford. The card seemed to weigh heavily in Blake's hand, the embossed letters catching the light. Marcus Bennett, Jr., civil rights attorney. Below that, in smaller text, was the name of his firm, one of the most prestigious civil rights practices in the city. Marcus turned to leave, then paused, adding one final twist of the knife. Oh, and regarding the Aston Martin? My mother purchased one this afternoon from your competitor across town. I believe that puts their sales figures ahead of yours for the quarter. He smiled, the expression neither warm nor kind. I hope it was worth it. As Marcus walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor just as his mother's had hours earlier, he could feel the weight of every eye in the showroom. But unlike the stares his mother had endured, these were filled with a different kind of recognition. Not of prejudice, but of justice being served. The glass doors parted again, and Marcus stepped out into the evening air, leaving behind a showroom full of witnesses to a powerful lesson in consequences. As he walked to his car, he pulled out his phone to call his mother. They had dinner plans to discuss, and a conversation about justice that was far from over. The evening air carried a hint of approaching autumn as Marcus settled into his car, the leather seat still warm from the day's sun. His fingers hovered over his mother's contact information for a moment before pressing dial, the events of the past hour still reverberating through his mind like aftershocks from an earthquake. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice carrying its usual strength despite the wise events. Marcus, she said, and in that single word he heard both pride and determination. It's done, he replied, starting his car, but not yet pulling away from Elite Motors. From his parking spot, he could see Blake Thompson through the showroom windows, still standing where Marcus had left him, the business card clutched in his hand like a death sentence. He won't sleep well tonight. Tell me everything, Victoria said, and Marcus could hear the subtle rustle of papers in the background. She was already at work, no doubt, turning this incident into something larger than just personal vindication. As Marcus began recounting the confrontation, he watched Blake finally move, stumbling toward his office like a man who had just discovered the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he'd believed. The other customers were still watching, their phones still occasionally rising to capture the aftermath of what had transpired. The legal documentation will be filed first thing tomorrow morning, Marcus explained, finally pulling out of the parking lot. But this isn't just about the lawsuit, is it, Mom? No, it never is, Victoria replied, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. The same smile she'd worn when teaching him to turn obstacles into opportunities. Have you seen the social media response yet? Marcus hadn't, but he wasn't surprised. In today's world, injustice rarely remained hidden for long. How bad is it for them? The video of my arrest is trending, Victoria said, her tone matter-of-fact. Several witnesses have already posted their accounts. Blake Thompson is about to learn a very public lesson about the power of perception in the digital age. As Marcus navigated through evening traffic, he and his mother began outlining their next steps. This was familiar territory for them both, turning personal affronts into catalysts for systemic change. Victoria had already scheduled meetings with her PR team, preparing to leverage this incident into a larger conversation about discrimination in luxury retail spaces. The Bennett Foundation, Victoria mused, referring to their family's philanthropic organization, could establish a program specifically focused on addressing retail discrimination. We could offer training, certification, maybe even create an accountability index for high-end businesses. Marcus smiled, recognizing his mother's ability to see beyond the immediate conflict to the broader possibilities for change. Blake Thompson won't just lose sleep over a lawsuit, he said. He's going to become an unwitting case study in how not to do business in the modern world. They arranged to meet for dinner at Victoria's favorite restaurant, an exclusive spot where she was treated with the respect she'd earned through years of success. As Marcus ended the call, he couldn't help but appreciate the irony. His mother would dine tonight in an establishment where her name opened doors, while Blake Thompson returned home to face the consequences of closing them. The next few days unfolded exactly as they had planned. The lawsuit filing made headlines, not just in local news, but in national publications. Business journals picked up the story, analyzing the potential impact on Elite Motors' brand and the luxury car market as a whole. Social media continued to churn with commentary, hashtags, and calls for accountability. Blake Thompson's attempts at damage control only made things worse. His hastily released statement, filled with corporate non-apologies and vague promises to do better, was torn apart by critics and activists alike. The very privilege that had insulated him for so long now served to magnify his fall. Meanwhile, Victoria turned her humiliation into a platform for change. She appeared on morning shows and business programs, speaking not with anger, but with measured authority about the persistent problem of retail discrimination. Her story resonated with countless others who had faced similar treatment, their shared experiences creating a momentum that couldn't be ignored. Marcus watched it all unfold while preparing for the legal battle ahead. Each piece of evidence, each witness statement, each carefully crafted legal argument was designed not just to win the case, but to set precedents that would ripple through the retail industry. The leather briefcase his mother had given him continued to fill with the tools of justice. A week after the incident, Victoria drove her new Aston Martin, purchased from Elite Motors' main competitor, past the dealership where she'd been arrested. The car's midnight blue finish caught the sunlight, a reminder of both the indignity she'd faced and the triumph she'd achieved. Through the showroom windows, she could see fewer customers than usual, and Blake Thompson was notably absent. The Bennett Foundation announced its new initiative the following day, a comprehensive program to address discrimination in luxury retail, complete with training resources, certification processes, and a confidential reporting system for consumers who faced similar treatment. The press release didn't mention Elite Motors by name. It didn't need to. Marcus took particular satisfaction in watching Elite Motors' board of directors call an emergency meeting. The dealership's reputation was in free fall, its sales figures plummeting as customers took their business elsewhere. Blake Thompson's position as owner and manager was becoming increasingly untenable. In his corner office, Marcus added another framed news article to his wall, this one featuring a photo of him and his mother outside the courthouse after filing the lawsuit. The image captured them both. Victoria, elegant and composed in victory, and Marcus, the warrior lawyer who had turned her humiliation into a moment of reckoning. The case would take months to work its way through the legal system, but the victory had already been won in the court of public opinion. Blake Thompson's empire of exclusion was crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of his own prejudices exposed to the light of public scrutiny. Victoria's words from years ago echoed in Marcus's mind as he reviewed the latest developments. Success isn't just about winning, it's about changing the game. Together, mother and son had done exactly that, turning one man's moment of discrimination into a movement for lasting change. The autumn air carried the promise of transformation as Marcus left his office that evening, his briefcase lighter, but his purpose heavier with the weight of justice and progress. The story of Victoria Bennett and Elite Motors would be remembered not just as a cautionary tale of discrimination, but as a testament to the power of dignity, determination, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and son committed to making the world a little more just, one battle at a time.